Okay. Thank you for coming out to this event, which is being held and filmed in the unceded shared traditional territories of the Squamish and Lil'wat nations. Welcome to the small in-person audience who are joining us tonight at the Rainbow Theatre, and welcome to all those who are joining us remotely via Zoom. My name is Dave Williamson. I am a Whistler Learning Center board member of the nonprofit group that brings you tonight's panel discussion on how autonomous vehicles could shape Whistler. The WLC is a registered Canadian charity governed by a board of directors, many of whom are in the audience tonight and wearing our name tags. The Whistler Learning Center has a mandate to bring lifelong learning opportunities to Whistler. We do that by partnering with educational institutions to bring courses to Whistler, promoting local learning opportunities, offering concierge service for educators, and developing new educational offerings, such as tonight's panel discussion, which is part of our Whistler Forum on Global Perspectives. The series started with a talk on electric vehicles and sustainable energy last November. And this talk was originally scheduled for spring of 2020, but then the pandemic threw us a curveball. We regrouped and decided to reduce our attendance from 200 down to 50 for a September event. But then the second wave arrived and we've had to adapt the programming yet again. Fortunately, due to generous sponsorship and support, we were able to leverage technology to bring this event to everybody virtually. Thank you, TELUS, our tonight's corporate sponsor. TELUS is making investments, developing capabilities, and forging partnerships focused on shared goals of creating better quality of life for residents and visitors, pursuing economic competitiveness to attract industry and talent, and fostering an environmentally conscious focus on sustainability. So sponsoring an event like this that educates the local community about technology that can enable sustainable transportation and address community challenges is a great fit. I'd also like to thank our supporters, the Whistler Literary Society, PSAV, Whistler Blackcomb, Tourism Whistler, and the Resort Municipality of Whistler, all for supporting this event. So now we've got a few housekeeping notes. We expect tonight's discussion to run for about an hour, after which we'll take a short break and then return for a question and answer period, and then try to wrap up around 7 p.m. The audience at home can submit their questions during the discussion using the Q&A feature on your Zoom screen. And to avoid passing around this roving mic and reduce audience movement in the actual auditorium or in the theater, you can text your questions during the discussion to 604-906-0232, and I think that is up on the board here, yes. Question submission will close during the break, and that will allow us to send them over to the moderator. So let's introduce tonight's panel, who will discuss autonomous vehicles and their potential impact on Whistler. We have Dr. David Dale Johnson of the Alberta School of Business with the University of Alberta at the far end. Next to him, we have Peter Leafley, Director of Technology Strategy with TELUS. And behind me, we have J.R. Hammond, CEO and founder of Canadian Air Mobility. And then the man who needs no introduction, Jack Crompton, Whistler Mayor, whose background in software and transportation makes him an ideal moderator for tonight's discussion. I will sanitize this microphone and hand it over to Jack. There you go.
Thank you, Dave. Now that we have space, we'll take off our masks. It is a real privilege for me to be a part of tonight's discussion looking at how autonomous vehicles could shape Whistler. I think as we consider our community and we consider this corridor, transportation advancement is crucial to our long-term success. So I think it'll be interesting to hear some thoughts about where we're going as a future and how it applies here. I want to share with you a little bit about each of our presenters, and then we'll hear from them. And I'll start with Dave Dale Johnson. David is a real estate economist and the Stan Melton Executive Professor in Real Estate at the Alberta School of Business. He completed his undergraduate and master's degrees at the University of British Columbia and graduated from the Haas School of Business at the University of California at Berkeley with his PhD. David has a long-standing connection to Whistler, finally making the jump, and he now calls it home, which is exciting for all of us. He's also a member of the RMOW Strategic Planning Committee, contributing expertise in the real estate, finance, and development and city building. So all of us, let's please welcome Dr. David Dale Johnson. Beside him is Peter Leithley. Peter Leithley is Director of Technology Strategy at TELUS, with responsibility for developing programs and projects related to smart cities and 5G implementations across Canada. Peter is a graduate of the London School of Economics and has spent much of his career at the intersection of planning and technology. So please welcome Peter Leithley. And right beside me is J.R. Hammond. J.R. Hammond is the CEO and founder of the Canadian Air Mobility, which specializes in creating the marketplace for electric vertical takeoff and landing vehicles, eVTOLs, in Canada. Canadian Air Mobility is spearheading the efforts in organizing, strategizing, and facilitating the air mobility ecosystem to bring the next frontier of electric flying vehicles to Canada. With Vancouver's unique geographic landscape, the existence of helicopter and float plane operations, and the drive for sustainable transport modes, Canadian Air Mobility is working to create the initial marketplace and ecosystem in Vancouver as an exclusive, equitable, and environmentally sound transportation method with the transportation, cargo, and air services markets. So please, with me, welcome J.R. Hammond. So the way we're going to move forward today is that each of our presenters will present, and then I'll ask them a couple questions. We'll have a bit of a conversation, and then, as Dave said, after the break, we will open it up to questions from the audience. Please, if you are on Zoom, start adding your questions there so we can have them ready for the second half of the program. So, without further ado, I will turn it over to Dr. Dave Dale Johnson to talk to us about what is an autonomous vehicle and where are we going as a society and as a community here in Whistler. Over to you, Dave.
Well, thanks, Jack. Great to be here. Thanks to the Whistler Learning Center. We've been talking about this event for a while, so it's terrific to actually be here and have it happen. Pete and I were talking before we got started. The last time I had a jacket on, and the last time I actually had somebody out there was March 12th. So this is kind of exciting just to be here. Anyway, how will AVs shape Whistler? I'll try and kind of give you some background and maybe some thoughts about the future. But this is a huge topic area. If you watch the video when we were getting started here, that's Zoox, which is a outfit, and their head offices in San Francisco. They're in the business of building and operating autonomous vehicles, and that was a real autonomous vehicle experience that you were watching as we got started here. Anyway, first of all, some definitions before we get started, just so everybody's on the same page. Society of Automotive Engineers have over the years developed these levels of automation. I guess my car is over there in zero autonomy. I perform all of the tasks, sometimes not so well. But way over here on the right is full automation. That means I could get in my car, I could go anywhere, I could conceivably even go off-road, I could drive in the ice and snow. So depending on whether you're Elon Musk or somebody else, how soon that will happen is in question. But we see level 2 cars all the time. The average, the typical Tesla out there is a level 2. And it actually is capable of doing a lot more, but typically in the way we see them operating in our communities, they're at a level 2 automation. So just a little bit more, 0 through 2 or the 0 through 3 actually involve human intervention or the ability for a human to intervene. 4 and 5 are very high automation, and it's really the vehicle operating itself. Under 4, we can step in if we have to, but hopefully not very often. There's another thing that I think we need to appreciate, and that is something called autonomous mobility on demand, or AMOD. The people who are thinking, including me, who are thinking about this evolving, have in mind an environment in which people typically would not own their own vehicle, and it would be kind of a merger between Uber and autonomous vehicles. So the idea is that I would not have a car anymore, and most of us would not choose to own cars. There's a big question as to whether that's going to be acceptable to the average household, but what we're going to be talking about tonight is an environment where most people actually choose to go in this direction, what we call autonomous mobility on demand. It's another phrase that's sometimes used, transportation as a service, TaaS. And again, the idea is now you don't have to invest in a car, you don't have to buy insurance, you don't have to maintain it, you don't have to store it, you don't have to park it. So my front yard, which everybody, those that know me know, it's a big, fat, wide driveway, and there's usually somebody walked by yesterday and said, "You're never here." Anyway, but anyway, that driveway would no longer be necessary. And if Jack would let me, I could build a lane house in my driveway. Anyway, but anyway, important to conceive, there's a fleet ownership, kind of a merger between Uber and autonomous vehicles. Typically, the individual would not have their BMW parked in their driveway that could do everything. They'd choose to perhaps get away from that. Anyway, this is an example in Chandler, Arizona. It's on hold currently because of COVID-19, but this is Waymo operating in Chandler, a autonomous mobility on demand program. People can sign into this program. I think they have about 1,000 households in Chandler who choose to use the program. And the idea is that you have an app on your phone, you call up the car, it comes and takes you, takes your children to school, or takes you to the shopping center, takes you to the office. But the bottom line is you don't need a car. All you need is the app on your phone, and Waymo takes care of the rest, but for COVID-19. So how are we making out? I mentioned Elon Musk. He thinks we'll be at level 5 actually very soon. At the same time, the guy who runs Toyota's Research Institute thinks we may never get to level 5. The issue is, you know, if you're following a vehicle and all of a sudden the mattress falls off the roof of the vehicle and is right in front of you, is the car smart enough? Does it have enough intellectual capacity to know what it's supposed to do? But up here on the far top on the right, you've got Waymo, Ford, which is actually Argo, Cruise, which is GM, Baidu, which is a large automobile manufacturer in China. For some reason, Tesla down in the lower left, and if I have time, I'll talk about that. They really don't deserve to be there. They should be up with the leaders, but the issue is how Navigant does their review, and it really has to do with how Tesla is going forward in terms of its technology. If I have time, I'll talk a little bit more about it. Here are the 5 leaders by another source: Waymo, which is Google, Tesla, Cruise, Baidu again, and Argo. And by the way, the last slide in my presentation here has a bunch of references. So for those of you who want to dig deeper, you're more than welcome to. So most of us see this as a big disruptor to the way we live and work and play. I always think about Jay Leno when I think about this, because the guy's got 125 cars hidden away somewhere, and life is going to change for him big time. I always suggest or show these slides, which I'm sure some of you have seen, but this is Easter Sunday, Fifth Avenue in New York, 1900 on the left, or in the middle actually, one automobile on the right. 13 years later, only one horse and carriage. And there's a graph on the left which kind of reflects what happened around the same time. Other examples of disruption are, the introduction of the shopping center in about 1950, freeways, cell phone, really significant factors in the way we live our lives. And most people who've really thought about this think there's a potential for pretty dramatic change in the way we live and work. There's some challenges, obviously. So on the left, I've got a few. AI, although we're moving rapidly in the direction of being better at that. U of A, by the way, has the third or fourth best team in the world in artificial intelligence. Snow and ice. How are we doing with connectivity? 5G is where we have to go. Consumer acceptance. 23 seconds, every 23 seconds, somebody gets killed on the road. Although oddly, that's a striking statistic, but in the US, the number of people killed in automobiles on an annual basis is very low relative to other causes of death, cancer, heart disease, et cetera. So got to have it in perspective. But all these things have to come together. Electric vehicles, if you watch the news, Elon Musk made an announcement on Tuesday regarding electric battery technology advancement. He wasn't terribly specific, but they're working very hard to push us ahead with respect to batteries for electric vehicles. Climate change, that's becoming more relevant to all of us, and I think will lead more of us to adopt electric vehicles as they become more convenient and easier to use. Economics, I'll talk a little bit more about in a moment, but there is significant savings in the household budget if we go to this AMOD setting. Connectivity, sensor technology, which is communicating between vehicles, vehicle and infrastructure, vehicle and individual and people through our cell phone. Convenience, a lot of people who are looking at this are saying that consumer acceptance is only going to happen really if it's convenient for people and easy for them to adopt, and they see it as a better way of life than what we have currently. And I guess that involves being able to watch Netflix on the way to Whistler, or do your business calls, or answer your emails, or whatever. So what does this mean for our cities? I have to say I chaired a panel at U of A 3 or 4 years ago, and it was about technology in cities, and that led me to get interested in autonomous vehicles, because one of the speakers talked about the transportation ecosystem and where it was going. And everybody was talking about AV technology, but nobody was talking about the impact on land use and on urban form. And of course, I'm an urban economist, so I'm immediately thinking, what does this mean to cities? Before we look at that, again, I guess the main points here are adoption is a big deal. I talked to a whole bunch of planners, city leaders in 2019. All of them said the big unknown is to what degree will people actually accept this, actually adopt the technology. And that's a big unknown. A colleague of mine at University of Calgary has done some work on household budgets, and if indeed people went the AMOD way, average household in Alberta is $72,000 a year. His estimates were they could save $12,000 to $20,000 a year in their household budget by going AMOD. So pretty significant if a household can put 20 grand or even 12 grand in their pocket each year. Nobody's sure when all of this is going to happen. Elon Musk thinks we'll be at 5 next year. Of course, he can go to the moon, so or wherever he's gone. And as I said, the Toyota guy doesn't think we'll ever get there. So, but anyway, so here's some of the effects: less congestion, less land required for parking. If you start thinking, if you take half the people out of the system and they're not driving cars anymore, you've got parking lots that are half empty and a huge amount of potential for densification and redevelopment. We have to have drop-off zones. So if you think about, I'll get to this with Whistler, maybe I'll get to it now, but think about going skiing. You go up to lot 8, you can just have somebody take you up there and drop you off. So there needs to be an area where you can be dropped off. Fewer accidents, obviously, and more density due to less parking, which I've already talked about. If we've got this fleet of AVs, they have to have a place to park. So we don't need a huge parking lot, but we need a parking lot somewhere where the vehicles go and wait to be summoned. Housing, no more parking needed. So that would be the lane house in my front driveway. Commuting is more attractive, obviously. So actually people might choose to live in Pemberton, not because it's cheaper, but because they like the environment better and they can be in an autonomous vehicle on their way to work. In the short run, superior locations win. If I have time, I'll talk a little bit more about that. More density in the urban core, but remote locations as Pemberton become more attractive. So for Whistler, I started thinking about this as we prepared this panel, and obviously you can imagine Whistler now with virtually no vehicles in the core area of Whistler, Creekside, perhaps all the way to Alpine Meadows. Ski lifts and mountain biking lifts would have to allow for drop-offs. And obviously the AVs we have here would have to accommodate skis and bikes. Significant reduction in mountain and retail parking lots. I'm not quite sure what CME would be doing in this environment because the snow plowing obligations would adjust. They wouldn't need to do my driveway anymore. Autonomous buses, we could imagine some jitneys or shuttles, perhaps running between Nesters and Whistler Village North. Platooning from Vancouver to Whistler, so autonomous vehicles doing that route, which I think Pete will talk a little bit about. But given Whistler, I would guess there's still going to be people with pickup trucks and snowmobiles and preferences for their own vehicle to do those things. And there's nothing in here saying that that's not going to be possible or permitted. So this is I just included this slide because everybody knows the geography here, but this is lot 7, 8, or 6, 7, and 8 in Blackcomb, 3, 4, and 5 adjacent to Whistler Village North. Think about that if now we need now we only need the space for half the number of cars or a quarter the number of cars. Lots of potential for redevelopment, parks, housing, more retail. Buried in here is how many people do we want to have at Whistler, but that's a whole other, I think that's a whole other panel. The last slide, this is actually an Edmonton-based company, Pacific Transportation. They've been running test case use cases in Edmonton, Calgary, Vancouver. Actually, I have a call with them next week, and maybe we can persuade them to come here to Whistler and experiment. And it works in the snow because they're doing it and I'm not even sure how to pronounce this, barkarbistatin. How's that? Does anybody know the way?
Correct.
Is that correct?
Yeah, you pronounced it correctly.
Okay, thank you. Anyway, I'm going to stop there. Thank you, and Jack, you're on.
Thank you, David. That was fascinating. Yeah, wow, well done.
Thank you.
Your photo of New York was striking to me, that 13-year transition from horse and buggy to vehicle. And I wonder if the primary difference between then and now is not that the technology exists, but the regulations didn't exist then. And now trying to drive adoption in cities who have been attached to the automobile for over 100 years will be challenging. What's the regulation framework like in cities around the world right now?
Well, most in the states federally and state by state, they're aware and adjusting regulations or trying to be prepared for the change that they know is coming. And I think that's true here in Canada as well. I can't speak to specifics, but the regulators are well aware that this is on the way.
And I imagine that once realized, the amount of data that will need to be sort of owned by car companies and whoever's running the AMOD or TAS program will be high. I'm sure there's concerns about privacy and what a car company knows about my life, where I go, what I do, and who I spend time with.
Yeah, most are aware of the situation in Toronto with Sidewalk Labs, where there's a tremendous amount of concern about privacy. And there's no question, but I'll give an illustration. Barcelona, which is one of the most wired cities in the world, the mayor simply said to the TELUSes, you can get this data, but it has to be not connected to any individual. We have to be able to deal with it in a way that maintains the privacy of the individual from who came the data. Back to your prior question, I took out a slide, which was actually San Francisco. They have 60 licenses for autonomous vehicle testing with a driver, without a driver. So these are testing. They're not actually economic and in place, but 64 licenses in San Francisco for people experimenting in this space.
So it's active and happening. I was surprised to see the situation in Arizona where actually autonomous vehicles are driving around picking people up and dropping people off once we're back from COVID.
And the video we saw as it started out, that's a driverless vehicle in San Francisco doing all of that. There may be a driver in there, not driving and watching what's going on, but pretty amazing what they're able to do.
Thank you. We appreciate it very much. So our next presentation is from Peter Leithley, Technology Strategy at TELUS, and he's going to talk to us about connectivity and the infrastructure needed to make autonomous vehicles a reality. Over to you, Peter.
Thanks very much. Really a total pleasure to be here, and maybe just to start out just a bit about myself. I've spent my whole life, between Vancouver and Whistler, so DJ's prospect of, watching Netflix on the 99 Up seems wildly appealing. But to Jack's introduction, so I'm a director in tech strategy at TELUS, so doing a lot of work on our smart cities program, as well as developing new use cases for our 5G network that we're rolling out across the country. Previous to TELUS, I was responsible for digital infrastructure and smart cities for the city of Vancouver, and did a bunch of things there, including the Ella pilot through EasyMile, the Vancouver example that DJ referenced. Vancouver and Surrey partnered together in terms of responding to the Government of Canada's Smart Cities Challenge. And principally, we were looking to build autonomous corridors, one in Vancouver and one in Surrey, where autonomous vehicles would run in complement with a whole bunch of other technologies. And what we did was a demonstration using that exact vehicle, actually. So if you're familiar with like the Athletes Village in Vancouver, you could get on one of those and it would go between there and the Canada Line station. And it actually snowed a few of those days, which they had the Easy Mile folks on hand and looking at what that looked like. And I think it actually did, create some issue, but not so much they had to shut it down. But anyway, so I did a lot of things there. And similar to DJ, my background from an academic perspective is in urban and regional planning. And I really looked at how technology gets involved with the urban form. I did my dissertation on citywide Wi-Fi. And then while in Vancouver, I built the public Wi-Fi network for Vancouver, which is, I don't know, the largest in Canada, 5th largest in the world. So I'm really interested in, how technology can be integrated in to city environments and in a really positive fashion. Okay, so yeah, what I'm going to do is walk through a few slides, just really describing why 5G is really a really great technology to complement autonomous vehicles. And also really want to convey that this isn't something that just happens. Like, although the technology is largely there and it's really amazing what, you can get on a Waymo car, called up on your phone and go to places, and there's some really amazing pilots and trials happening. But to get beyond those pilots and trials, and for us to be able to do this, there's still a lot of work that we have to do. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the infrastructure aspect of it. So, you have to build wireless networks, and then you have to, build adoption and those sorts of things. So, 5G enables, it's a new, it's 1G through 5G. Each of them came with some specific benefits. And 5G has been designed with some specific capabilities that lend themselves really well towards autonomous vehicles. So this network is designed to connect virtually everyone and everything together, including machines, objects, and devices. So there's some, more technical kind of definition style things about sort of 3 parent categories of the technology that are really beneficial. So there's enhanced mobile broadband, which is really, that's a lot of the messaging you'll see on TV about how 5G is going to be faster and provide you with more bandwidth. So, it certainly does that. Like, it advances the amount of bandwidth available to you on your devices and that sort of things considerably. But the other 2 sides of what 5G do are actually maybe the more interesting ones, especially as it pertains to autonomous vehicles. So massive machine type communication basically means that we're going to be able to deploy, millions of sensors around our environment, so you can manage what you measure. So if, you want to know what the road temperature is all the way up the highway, you can have sensors in place that do that, and a wireless network that, safely and securely connects all those sensors together. The other really important one is ultra low latency. So, I mean, the easy way to describe this is, you're getting rid of the spinny wheel basically on your laptop. So you definitely want to make sure an autonomous vehicle is able to react very, very quickly and doesn't get hung up and make a mistake. So ultra low latency basically means that it's able to communicate back to where the data center are and the servers, and do that at tremendous faster speed, so that it can react in milliseconds rather than the lag time that we're kind of used to. And then there's 2 other really important aspects, especially as they pertain to privacy and the security side. So this mobile edge compute just basically means that we're going to bring the compute, the data centers and the computation dramatically closer to the edge of the network. So, the way that a lot of our network is built today, you'll get on your phone, it'll go back to a tower, connect to fiber optics. In BC, a lot of the traffic goes to Harbour Centre in downtown Vancouver, and then it goes on fiber lines that go really along the railway tracks from there east to Toronto and Montreal, and then south to Seattle. And it's in places where you've got TELUS cloud services, or Microsoft or Amazon, located in Toronto and Montreal. So it's got to go that distance right now. So what the opportunity is that we're going to be bringing the computation dramatically closer to that edge of the network. So it doesn't need to, even though it's going the speed of light, going to Toronto and back is still a bit of a ways. So That has a huge implication in terms of certainly the speed, but also some of the privacy implications as well. And then the other one that's really interesting is network slicing. So instead of all of the traffic related to, say, autonomous vehicles or the police or fire being on the same internet as everybody else, you can slice it so that people are on secure lanes, basically. So there's no one else in your lane. So if you want to make sure that the autonomous vehicle doesn't have to, deal with traffic of the total internet and get maybe hung up at some sort of particular bottleneck, you can securely have its own slice of the network segregated off so that it's there's some huge security implications there, but certainly an important thing to consider when designing wireless networks for autonomous vehicles. And this slide is really just meant to say there's a lot of sort of busyness on it, but really there's a whole ecosystem of things that need to come together. So you've got the federal government having to auction off wireless spectrum. So, all the different way that the wireless network works is over these, basically licensed pieces of spectrum that the federal government heavily regulates and TELUS and the other carriers purchase and make use of. But then there's also the whole device side. So, your phones are increasingly going to have 5G chipsets in them, but so are, some of the sensors that are on the road, or potentially and likely the cars and the autonomous vehicles that are going to go through that, 0 to 5 kind of spectrum that DJ talked about. So there's a whole bunch of pieces that need to really come together for this to happen. And the reason, sort of touching on the capabilities of 5G and that ecosystem, once you have all those pieces together, what a 5G network can really do is connect the car, not just to the other cars, but to pedestrians, say, that happen to have a mobile device or maybe some other piece of technology on them. Certainly to the infrastructure, like the traffic lights, other cars, the network itself, cloud infrastructure that can do a whole bunch of things. And again, when it's brought closer to the edge, it just speeds up a lot of the capability. And then maybe even to DJ's home, where he's got that spot in the driveway, and maybe it needs to know when it can get the next electric charge and how close those charging stations are, or how close to home you happen to be. So in terms of that work involved, I mean, this is a pretty simplistic 1, 2, 3 kind of on what needs to happen, but certainly deploying the physical infrastructure and the network and getting the spectrum in place is really important and a really critical first step. Second to that is starting to pilot some of the use cases and capabilities. And DJ showed a few things that are happening globally. I'll show a few things that are happening in Canada. And then once you've piloted out in a safe way some of the capabilities of autonomous vehicle, then figuring out how to scale that. So in terms of step one, Whistler is really an interesting place because when we hosted the 2010 Winter Olympics, we spent $1 billion redoing the sea to sky highway. And when they did that, they built fiber optics along the side of it. And principally that was for, at least in respect to the Olympics, when they were doing all of the events up at Whistler, the ski jump and the downhill and things like that, and they had TV crews filming that. The media center was actually in the convention center downtown Vancouver. So they had to send the video files from Whistler back to the city. And so they built this fiber to be able to do that and really overbuild it. So, some of the infrastructure required in terms of step one is at least in part there, which is an important, first step towards this. But we would need to build out, more of the radio access network, leverage the spectrum that will be available from the federal government and such, and be able to do that as we move in towards, pilots and eventual scale. So here's a map of, in Canada, there is still quite a bit happening. So each of these dots, I'm sorry about it doesn't really come across tremendously well, but in Vancouver, there's a project out at UBC called Aurora, which is actually partnered with, I think, one in U of A with Edmonton. So it's Active Aurora, Actives in Edmonton, Aurora's in Vancouver, and the Vancouver one is focused on some of the wireless network aspects applicable to autonomous vehicles. There's also a 5G corridor between Quebec and Ontario where both provincial governments and a whole host of partners are looking at autonomous vehicles and how 5G networks can be leveraged to make that happen. There's a facility outside of Ottawa where they're running autonomous vehicles on an airfield, again, with a whole ecosystem of different players. So there's a lot already happening in Canada. And this is, less of the advertising. Really what I wanted to say here is that when you do all this work, having partners is really, really critical. And you have to bring together a whole consortia of different people together. And just an important aspect, and having done some of that work before, TELUS is already a huge part of this community in terms of, certainly being headquartered in Vancouver, but doing a lot of charitable work and other sorts of things in the community. And it is really important to get the right set of partners together, with like-mindedness, to be able to progress some of these ideas, because it's challenging to do, and doing with people that you like to work with is a good way to start. All right, thanks very much.
Thank you very much. So one of your slides that jumped out at me was the vehicle in the middle, and then all of the connections outward. And I heard it said that the biggest challenge of automation of vehicles is human behavior. And I was seeing something about there's zero jaywalking in Munich, but if you're in London, it's everywhere. And that difference is not something that can be predicted by, maybe it could be predicted by some incredible algorithm, but it's variable. And I'm just wondering, what are your thoughts about how vehicles will talk to humans and deal with variable behavior between people?
Yeah, I think like what that slide was really trying to convey is that driving a car is a complicated thing. You need to be, when you're looking out the window of your car, you're seeing people and streetlights and all those sorts of things. So if an autonomous vehicle is going to do the same thing, it's got to have that same type of a capability and be able to do it in, milliseconds, the same way that we do. And to be honest, the pilots and trials they have going on right now, autonomous vehicles can actually do a lot of that dramatically more quickly than people can, which is where the safety element comes in. You don't have drunk driving associated with autonomous vehicles. You don't have people speeding way over the limit. So all these sort of risky behaviors autonomous vehicles aren't doing. But you do need to have that capability in place so that the car can see or be aware of certainly the other vehicles and people and cyclists and all these sorts of things. So that's where a 5G network is a really important building block, basically.
And it would need to connect with a phone in a pocket, and which makes it more difficult if someone's not carrying a device, but it's fairly ubiquitous at this point, I guess.
Phones are, certainly, broadly adopted for sure, but that isn't to say that you need to be carrying a $1,000 iPhone. There's other types of form factor that just need to have, the right chipset and things like that in place, so that you can accomplish the same thing. So I think, having it be equitable and not just for certain people is a real consideration as well.
Fascinating. Thank you very much. We appreciate it. Our final presenter is J.R. Hammond, CEO and founder of Canadian Air Mobility, and he will talk to us about air mobility, and we will sanitize and pass the clicker. Over to you, J.R.
Excellent. Good afternoon to everybody here in Whistler and to our subscribers online. We wanted to express the gratitude to our moderator, Jack, my fellow panelists here, and as well as the incredible work done from Suki and the Whistler Learning Center. It's a privilege to be here today. So my name is J.R. Hammond, and I am wearing two hats today with the privilege of representing Canadian Air Mobility as the founder and chief executive officer. Our mandate with Canadian Air Mobility is really focusing on being that activist investor into the environmental and social projects associated with advanced air mobility, starting with our headquarters in Vancouver, but really having a national framework in mind. Fortunately, on the second hat, I'll be speaking about our consortium that we've created here in Canada, bringing together the advanced air mobility ecosystem and showcasing the diverse stakeholders and insight into bringing some of this technology to our different regions across the country. We also acknowledge that we are broadcasting on the Squamish and Lillooet First Nations, and we are honored and privileged to continue to lean into the integration of Indigenous wisdom into the air resources and as we develop out the advanced air mobility technology. So we'll start off on a high-level definition. I'm going to introduce this term of advanced air mobility, and what we're really focusing on is zero-emission aircraft powered by either electricity or hydrogen fuel cells, in giving us the 3D space above our cities and regions for additional connectivity. Now, the advancement in both battery and hydrogen fuel cells have given us the ability to have vertical takeoff and landing capacity to go point to point rather than requiring lots of ground infrastructure via conventional airports, runways, taxiways, or the expansions of highways. We are looking at these vehicles carrying between 6 to 14 passengers, such that we have the economies of scale and those price points, making it available for the general public and not just for the upper 1%. The critical piece is there's a developing industry in Canada on the drone or the micro application side. A lot of these learnings with this existing industry are playing into the advanced air mobility side on the complex, larger scale operations. While the majority of these initial vehicles will have a pilot on board in order to satisfy the high degree of safety regulations that we already have for air transport in the country, there's a movement to become autonomous as quick as our regulations and safety standards can be maintained. So with that initial introduction in mind, we'll start off with a brief video to showcase what this technology looks like.
Pioneers of electric vertical takeoff and landing aircraft say that the 2020s will be the decade when the much-hyped urban air mobility revolution becomes a reality. According to research by Nextra Advisors, across 75 leading cities worldwide, up to $318 billion will be spent on urban air mobility between 2020 and 2040. The company, which advises aerospace and transportation investors, believes that as many as 28,000 eVTOL aircraft will enter service over the next 20 years.
We think that certain cities can actually begin to absorb and operate electric vertical takeoff aircraft as soon as they're available and certified. That could be as early as next year. This is not just a US game. There are other countries that are anxious to have vehicles certified and put into operation far more quickly than the dates or deadlines that you're hearing from regulators, or for that matter, from some of the industry spokespeople from Uber or elsewhere. So I'll give you an example, a very good example of Vancouver in British Columbia. Vancouver is a water city. The city itself is surrounded by water on 3 sides. It has a vibrant, profitable helicopter charter sector, and NAV Canada is anxious to begin providing air traffic services for piloted vehicles as soon as they become available and put into operation. So that could be next year.
So now this is some of our work that we've been progressing in Vancouver. What does that reality potentially look like on the Whistler side? Within all of our studies and really diving into the environmental, economic, and social aspects of the technology, we've identified 3 areas for the Whistler application piece where advanced air mobility could play in. The first one is really diving into the search and rescue opportunities. Having a natural incorporated system through the mountainous areas, this piloted and then very quickly autonomous search and rescue opportunity showcases how additional human lives could be complemented by a vertical takeoff and landing vehicle similar to that of a helicopter, with much more nimbleness, a more quieter noise profile, and operating on that zero emissions aspect. Secondarily, the tourism side. How can we facilitate the additional movement of people, goods, and services from our existing aviation corridors, that of YVR, Seattle International, Abbotsford Airport, and have a seamless integration from commercial aviation or general aviation to that of an eVTOL or an HVTOL vehicle transitioning those passengers through to the Whistler Municipal Resort area. And then lastly, on connecting Indigenous or remote communities within the British Columbia side. There is a massive opportunity for this technology that doesn't require the ground infrastructure to start creating the connection pieces for the delivery of medical services, COVID vaccine, PPE, to areas that conventional ground transportation have been a strain. Now, before we start looking at this technology, we had to form a framework to ensure that we were moving society together and forward in a positive way, specifically looking at what advanced air mobility can play out. The first one is looking at the equitable piece. And the equitable side is ensuring it's not just the upper 1% that are benefiting from this technology. Secondarily, that inclusivity side. What does it look like that we can have different opportunities for mobility needs and services within the advanced air mobility side? Resiliency, intermodal applicability, accessibility, and zero emission aircraft. A framework that we can build upon, yes, within the Vancouver area, but expanding nationwide and showcasing where those learnings are going to play into. One thread that loops all of these together is maintaining or exceeding the high level of safety that we already have within the aviation industry. To showcase some of the different aspects of what this could look like, we bring up the infrastructure piece. What does that new community connection look like when we have an intermodal opportunity of, yes, existing ground AV structure, be it on the public transportation, personal AV vehicles, in conjunction with that of a vertical takeoff and landing vehicle shown here in our slide. And similarly, to build upon what Peter was talking about on bringing together the consortia and the discussions, we have been focusing our efforts in the last year and a half on bringing the brightest and most talented minds from across the continent on showcasing how are we going to start solving out some of these initial issues. Our list of hurdles and concerns is continuing to be tackled, and it's leaning into the incredible minds showed here on some of the slides as we continue to build out and bring in more of the public discussion to identify what are those critical use cases for this technology, knowing that it's not going to be ubiquitous brush across, replacing public transportation, replacing all of our ground transportation. This is an opportunity for specific areas. When we're looking at the different business lines of this application, the key part is to understand the 3 lines of business, which we'll look at on the ground transport, the passenger, air services, and cargo opportunities. These are the 3 different business lines that give us an opportunity for connection, having the safety and regulations in place to ensure that we're progressing in the most efficient and effective way possible for what that region or society needs. When we talk about these mobility as a service opportunities, this is when you can have the opportunity as shown for some of the operations that were experienced down in Sao Paulo in Brazil, having the vertiport availability on your app per se, and giving you that point-to-point operation moving with this vertical takeoff and landing vehicle. Now, what we're looking at here in Canada, we have a couple of companies that are just going through their testing and certification process. This is one of them that we have here testing in northern Saskatchewan called the Blackflyer Opener. This is the start. This is where we're going to be moving forward. Our next steps is really looking at the different opportunities for bringing advanced air mobility into Canada. Today, for us, we're looking at Vancouver and having our initial operation flight, moving cancer isotopes from Vancouver's General Hospital to that of Victoria's Royal Jubilee Hospital, hoping for operations by the end of 2021. It has been the diverse group of stakeholders that we've been able to lean into to start to identify where those opportunities could exist and continue to share those learnings through different regions and how it could be applied. We are here today to start the conversations on creating a movement of expanding our minds of what the 3D space above us could look like in writing our transportation narratives of the future. I am here to commit my time, effort, and energy in leaning into the conversations, knowing that the public perception and integration are the conversations needed for bringing this technology in that inclusive, equitable, and sustainable way. Today, I am choosing courage over comfort. Tomorrow, I will continue to choose courage over comfort. I'll leave off on an invitation to everybody here and online to continue to explore the ways that we can expand these conversations and lean into those heavy, sticky questions to ensure that when this technology can be applied in the specific areas, we have asked, invested, and spent the time necessary to ensure we've covered the assets for the technology advancement. Notice the change in humanity that can come from these starting conversations today. We are at an opportunity to continue this work going forward, and we look forward to extending the invitation as we progress. So thank you all very much, and I look forward to the additional Q&A questions coming up soon.
Thanks, JR. So when I was telling people about this, I was saying, you should come. We're talking about autonomous vehicles and flying cars. And then I laugh because it seems so unbelievable. But then you show us things that look like flying cars. So I'm trying to restrain my laughter every time I say flying car. But tell me about the current regulatory framework in Canada and where we're at and where we're going as far as regulation is concerned.
This is a great point, and we often refer back to anyone that has referenced the cartoon The Jetsons, where they're flying around those little pods. That's actually here. And the truth is we're working with the national regulators from Ottawa, from Victoria, and in our local regions, Vancouver and Whistler, on identifying and maintaining or exceeding those safety standards. That's not only on operations. This is on additional noise concerns, visual disturbance, pollution requirements, ensuring that that framework starting from day one. The really beneficial part is the drone industry has been working over the past decade and a half that has painted a beautiful platform for us to build upon. In conjunction with the AV technology, we are not trying to create this new island technology away from all the existing platforms. How are we continuing to build those bridges and relationships so that we can create a stronger, more integrated solution for the regulators to work with?
But there is a need for those regulations to change, obviously, before this can become a reality and we can be flying cars up to Whistler and back to Vancouver?
That's it. Point blank, we do not have any regulations that currently exist for this. So we are working hand in hand with Ottawa on developing them out in sync with the operational opportunities.
Okay. Thank you very much, Jared. I look forward to questions afterwards. And so if you are joining us online, please type into the question and answer box your question, and we will come back in 10 minutes. Actually, let's say 5. We'll be back in 5 minutes to answer all your questions. Look forward to seeing you then. Thanks.
Hey, can you put the names of the people beside them? You should show on the top. Great. Perfect.
Okay. I hope you enjoyed your break. We are back, and I want to start with something that we were discussing before we started tonight, and that was this 20-year-old this 20-year-old person in a Tesla driving from Calgary to Edmonton, asleep with both people in the vehicle sleeping in their chairs and pulled over by the police. It occurs to me as we talked about that the technology exists for level 4 and level 5 driverless vehicles. It's not an issue of technology. It's an issue of, as I've been rattling on about, humans. But if it's okay, and if that vehicle can technically do a drive from Calgary to Edmonton, why do we need this network to be so burly and impressive if we're already seeing vehicles driverless between places like Edmonton and Calgary? I'll pass that on to you, Peter.
That example, and there's other things you can, go onto YouTube and see people asleep at the wheel of their Tesla. I mean, to DJ's point, you're really seeing that sort of autopilot type of technology being activated on particular roads. The car is aware of, uses computer vision, so has cameras on board and sensors, so that it's seeing what it's kind of immediately around it. The difference is when you start to get vehicles in, say, more complex urban environments where it's not a freeway where you got a bunch of cars and it's pretty isolated what's on there. You've got people and cyclists and all these sorts of things moving around. You've got red lights and green lights and things for the car to be aware of. Beyond just the technical aspect of it, the other interesting angle is that if the car is aware of how all the other cars around are moving, what infrastructure, what lights are green, what lights are red, how people are flowing through the city, you can drive a huge amount more efficiency. There's a lot of people talking about, well, maybe you just get rid of street lights completely, and then cars will be able to move much more freely through. So you'll save a lot of time. So MIT, under this guy Carlo Ratti, has done some really interesting visuals of what this could look like, where you remove traffic lights completely, and it has a huge marked increase in how fast cars move around the city. So it's more than just the fact that you can do some things today. It's I guess the argument is you can be able to do a lot more, and the gains to society are much more profound.
Yeah. 2 points, Jack. One is this example in Alberta with the driver and passenger asleep. Had somebody driven across the road and they'd run into them and killed them, that would be like the Tesla incident I think it was in Arizona 2 years ago, where the pretend driver wasn't paying attention and a bicyclist walked in front of the vehicle, and that was the end. Somehow we can accept that happening all the time with vehicles that are driven by you and I. Obviously, it's not a good thing, but for it to happen with an autonomous vehicle is somehow not acceptable. So that's point one. Point two is the Tesla is, I alluded to this before, there's really two systems out there, and please keep in mind I'm not an engineer, nowhere close, but Tesla's approach to this is very different from Waymo's. Tesla's approach is cameras, AI, and lots of data in the background interpreting what the camera sees. Waymo's approach is somewhat similar, but depending more on LiDAR and radar, but also on mapping the environment in which the vehicle operates. So you could find this online, but the area in Phoenix that Waymo can actually technically operate in is defined by the area where they've very carefully located all the curbs and all the corners and all the lights and this and that. So it's a much more structured relationship between the vehicle and the environment. that's why Elon Musk thinks he can get to 5 next year or the year after, and Waymo probably doesn't see it that way. My sense as a non-engineer is that Elon Musk is going to win this race. That's just my opinion, just because of the approach being taken. Can you imagine having to map 99 and Vancouver to Seattle, et cetera, et cetera? That's, you know, I think downstream that's expected not to be necessary, but Tesla's jumping over that hurdle.
And mapping something that's changing. I mean, a rock falls on the highway. Right. It's no longer the same road that was mapped originally. Huh. For a VTOL, does an autonomous VTOL lean on a cellular network that it links into, or is it alone in space managing its own travel?
So great point on that connectivity piece. We're very fortunate from the aviation side where we're coming from an existing smart network already. There are these smart aircrafts that already talk to each other for detect and avoid systems when you fly in a commercial airliner from Vancouver to Calgary to Edmonton per se. We're coming into a space that already has a high degree of connectivity. So it becomes a lot easier to integrate new, more advanced technologies in there that can already integrate into a safe airspace. And going back to the autonomy side, we really are looking at how aviation can be that level 5 as quick and efficiently as possible, because the human being pilot comes to their own limit when they're operating in dense urban areas to maintain the safety of that aircraft when we have wind tunnels, microclimates, other drones potentially flying into space. So we're hoping to be one of the leaders in showcasing some of that information there, maintaining and improving upon that safety side.
Okay, there are many questions here to dig into. So I'll start with one from Allison Jenkins. How many years are we away from being able to purchase an autonomous vehicle from the dealership? Anyone know?
Well, if you believe Elon,
yeah,
2 years or a year.
I told,
and in fact, if you buy a Tesla today, it's pretty autonomous.
Yeah. Well, I was telling David I was at the Ava hotel over here, and my friend was standing on the corner, and I said, "Hey, Charles, what are you doing?" And he said, "Watch this." And he took out his phone, he pressed the button, and a car over by the front door of the Ava moved, came around, and he got in the driver's side door and took off. So, I mean, that's the vehicle coming to its driver so that it can move. There can't be too many steps between that and it coming to his home and picking him up and taking him to the village. So you're saying now?
Yeah, I think where we are not is AMOD.
Sure.
And Tony Seba is kind of a expert in this area. There's lots of his videos online, and there's a link in my last slide to one of his talks. But he's an optimist. He thinks we'll be there with autonomous mobility on demand by 2030. So that's not just being able to go and buy a car. That means that communities have actually bought in, and we're in a different world than we are today.
Yeah, maybe just to build on that. I mean, maybe the interesting question is, well, what do we want it for? I mean, if we want an autonomous car vehicle to be able to just mean that we don't have to put our hands on the wheel, that's one thing. If we want an autonomous vehicle to be able to dramatically change how efficient the transportation network is, that's another thing. So I think it's there's certainly things you can buy an autonomous vehicle that does some things today. I think the question is how many more things this can be applied to.
Which then does require that connected to everything sort of behavior rather than just managing what's in front of it at the moment. It needs to be able to talk to streetlights and talk to other vehicles in ways that it can't at the moment.
Yeah.
Okay, another question. I understand, this is from Suki Shen. I understand that for individuals and families, saving money moves people to adopt new practices, as does convenience. Is the assumption that autonomous vehicles are expensive to own and are owned by companies, not individuals? And will autonomous vehicles and cost savings advantages apply to commercial trucking for goods and services as well?
Yeah, the answer is yes. And, I didn't talk about trucking at all, but that's that's happening. If we think about where that's going, big implications for supply chain, because you don't have to, you can platoon trucks. You don't have, they can go 24/7 because you can have a driver just checking in periodically. So it's a whole different environment than we have currently. To the first point, which is cost, the price is going to drop as battery prices drop, and we're already seeing electric vehicles in the 30 to 40,000 price range. So autonomous vehicles will get down there as well fairly quickly.
Thank you. Assuming the security of 5G technology is susceptible to Canada's relationship with China, how does AMOD operate safely? And maybe just back to that conversation of data and where I live, what I'm doing. So thoughts around safe operations of AMOD.
Yeah, I mean, like the some of those capabilities I talked through about, you know, what 5G is able to do, and some of the technologies involved. I mean, privacy is super important to being able to deliver some of these use cases and services to benefit society. So, I mean, TELUS has a tremendous amount of effort around that, and some of the ways that we're designing that network are purposeful towards being able to protect privacy, making sure that we're adhering to, you know, all of the federal and as well as provincial laws around where data can reside and where it can move to. So there's a lot there, but it's certainly effectively baked into how, you know, both TELUS, the country, and other countries are building out their 5G networks.
And just to build upon that too, when we talk about not only the privacy aspect, but the operation side too, the questions that we're evaluating is what happens when that operation is compromised, be it on the autonomous aviation side or autonomous vehicle side. How are we ensuring we have those security protocols in place so that vehicle cannot be used in a negative way, the operations continue in their safe and defined areas and doesn't go into either rural, residential, or different airspace where it's not applicable for operations? These are some of the fundamental questions that need to be evaluated as we continue to learn about it and apply it.
So Chris Pettengill asks, why is Canadian Air Mobility being so careful to underscore that flying AVs are additional supplementary platform rather than a replacement of ground vehicles? Roads are really expensive, and the potential of getting rid of many of them is appealing. And I think that this goes to the conversation of real estate and the change in real estate value, and that's something that interests me. You talked earlier about it doing both, that these are vehicles that drive and fly. But why not a vision of the future where driving and all of the infrastructure that is there to support driving goes away?
Mm-hmm. This paints into the future vision where we start looking about the way we design cities, towns, and regions, not in our conventional grid concept of needing kilometers and kilometers of roadways or ground infrastructure. The reality is where we are today in the technology, we are limited in our energy capacity to move people, goods, and services with those specific missions. So that's why we've taken an intermodal opportunity, not erasing all the capital investments, public tax dollars into the existing transportation, but saying, how can we complement it so that we don't need to tunnel at an additional $1 billion per kilometer, build additional bridges that infect the wildlife, the movement of natural marine resources? What does the air represent as a more cheaper and efficient opportunity today with conventional technology, and also starting to play into that roadmap of a different urban design in the future?
Real estate values. Talk to us about the change in real estate values from autonomous vehicles.
Well, I'll give a couple of examples. One of my favorites is, so let's say we have an imaginary city which has 2 shopping centers, and parking lots, as they are typical now, 4 or 5 or 6 slots per 1,000 square feet. So we introduce AMOD. So all of a sudden we need 1/3 or 1/2 of the parking. So now layer upon that, one of those shopping centers is in a little better location and has a really cool anchor tenant, and the other one is not quite as good location and doesn't have the cool anchor tenant. So what's going to happen over time is tenants are going to migrate to the better location because they now have additional space because they can build more FAR to accommodate more tenants. Maybe they can even densify and put some residential so they create more pedestrian traffic. This is all short run, assuming the city doesn't grow. But the bottom line is shopping center A is better positioned than shopping center B. So you can see those kind of adjustments. Another example would be now you can build a condominium tower without parking because you don't need parking, or you can build a condominium tower with half the parking or a third the parking. So that, I mean, there's a bunch of ways to look at that, but that potentially enhances land value because now the developer can afford to pay more for the land because he or she doesn't have to accommodate 2 cars per unit or 1.5 cars per unit anymore. So it's going to be very complicated. Another example is at the periphery, you can start doing subdivisions without parking, without garages. So you can have you can build row houses or duplexes or whatever. If you truly have AMOD, then you need no parking or a lot less parking than you otherwise would have.
Yeah, I think it increases potentially the amount of available land within communities. I mean, one sort of further extension of that is, cities spend a lot of time managing curb space. You got signs up that say when you can park, when you can't park, who can park there, all those sorts of things. Though that land, which we use, for that purpose now, can be redesigned so that you could have parks and, other space, housing potentially, taking back, I think a part of that urban fabric is an interesting opportunity.
And you spend time in China, Dave, is that happening in these new big super cities that are being built? Is there a consideration that vehicular traffic will move differently in an autonomous world?
Well, there's a new city being built southeast of Beijing. It's a high-tech city, and it's one of President Xi's pet projects, and that's all being accounted for in that city. It's going to be massive. I mean, beyond our imagination. It'll be a tech hub. So they're ahead of us. To one of the points we made earlier, I watched a panel, I guess last year when I was in Beijing, and it was about autonomous vehicles. And one of the panelists said, we're going to be first because everyone here has a cell phone. The president can say this is happening tomorrow, and it will happen tomorrow. So they're playing a different game than we are, and it is the way it is. And
this is a democratically elected politician saying this, but apparently democracy is not a problem there. You're able to dictate what happens and where cars go.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. What happens, question from the audience, I think it's from Stuart Rempel. What happens to the 5G network and cars during a power outage?
I mean, that's designed into the redundancy and reliability of these things. So there's a lot of effort already taken to have, backup power available. Cellular communication is already super critical to any kind of, natural disaster or emergency event. I mean, there's a whole effort now around communications first as like a disaster response effort. So I think when they had that massive hurricane in New Orleans, the first thing the military does is roll in, basically communications infrastructure so that everyone can start talking again. So that's already a big part of how we build and stand up our networks. That's to say that effort still needs to be, absolutely furthered. And as we start to bring, more services and things that are really critical onto that network, then we need to make sure that it's designed properly. But it's very much a part of how we already design the wireless network.
And if disconnected for any reason from the network, the vehicle itself is able to revert to old behaviors of seeing things and adjusting according to what is in its immediate vicinity rather than having to lean on the network's inputs, correct?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, like, I mean, that's a part of sort of DJ is talking about, you know, how these things are designed, and there's some differences there. But, you know, fundamentally, it's not like the autonomous pilots that are on the road right now are just fully reliant on strictly the network. There's a combination of the compute and the hardware that are in the car already. So it's got, you know, some computers on board and some cameras and sensors that are run inside of the vehicle itself. Like the video we saw at the beginning was that car seeing a bunch of other cars and vehicles and putting different color boxes around. A lot of that is done inside the vehicle already. It's just complemented by being connected to the network. So you can see further, you can see more, you can have more information as a part of how that vehicle is making decisions.
So it can operate on or off a 5G network would be.
I mean, I think we need to make sure that that's a part of the design for sure.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, ideally all these things work in sort of a symbiotic fashion and add value to each other.
Well, under a level 4, red light comes on. You're driving now, buddy.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Huh. There are many questions here, so I'm not going to be able to get through them all. I'm wondering if you have questions for each other, or I can just keep going back to this list.
In terms of the autonomous vehicle, like just in terms of the, I guess, the cost savings that was described earlier, like just getting the autonomous flying vehicle to go from VGH to Victoria. Like, what are we talking about savings here? That, like, right now you can still, as you're saying, like take that stuff down to the existing heliport, fly it over there. But I imagine that this is like a substantial cost savings to do it the way you're describing.
That's it. And that was one of the main reasons it was our initial use case in the Vancouver zone, was to focus on how it's not only the economic savings, but the environmental and that social impact. Conventionally, we use a helijet helicopter to move those cancer isotopes so that patients in Victoria can be treated. And it's a very time sensitive and critical delivery aspect to get those isotopes there as quick as possible, knowing that the half-life decay rate prevents less patients being treated, the more time spent in transportation. So what we look at is how do we take a smaller, more specific electric vertical takeoff and landing vehicle, not a larger size helicopter, move it hospital to hospital, having a lower noise profile, a lower cost profile, and zero emissions to ensure that a sufficient amount can be transported and more patients can be treated over in the Victoria side. And this is playing into ensuring it has to be those three aspects, not just something just for a tourism aspect or just for the business executive per se, to get over traffic in a dense area.
It seems to me that this removes the need, all of this, whether it's flying or driving, removes the need for drivers. It's self-evident. But there are 1 billion people employed as drivers. Mm-hmm. What does this do to, and maybe this is beyond your sort of expertise, but I just wonder, what does this do to society to lose that number of jobs as quickly as we saw going from horse and buggy to vehicles? Thoughts?
So a couple of answers. One is on the truck side, there aren't enough truck drivers already. So we're actually solving a problem. On the AV car side, I listened to the CEO of Zoox talk on this very subject, and her argument was that there's plenty of jobs in the AV business. And an example that she gave is that a lot of the systems that are being proposed would have a backup person somewhere monitoring the AV traffic. And the example would be the AV runs into a problem that it can't solve by itself, and it has some way to link with, to communicate the problem to Harry Smith, who's in a building somewhere connected to the vehicle, and he or she can then check out the problem and advise the vehicle what to do. So that's just an example of one job, and it obviously depends how our AV infrastructure evolves. But her argument was that there are jobs going to be created in this industry.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of people worried about this. I mean, you can watch lots of videos from World Economic Forum and lots of other organizations concerned about how automating a whole bunch of things is going to impact jobs. To be like, and there's different camps out there in terms of your perspective on it. I mean, I'm an optimist in that respect. The Industrial Revolution created more jobs than it crushed. And the standard of living for people, through that generally went up, and we're seeing, I think that same opportunity play out through this sort of more generalized automating huge parts of our society. I'm optimistic that creates jobs more so than it takes away, but it's an important area to look at as we do any of these changes.
Jack, let me just add one point to that, which is this doesn't happen automatically. So I think government at all levels and industry have to recognize this as an issue and try to build in a way to deal with the problem, whether it be through education or, re-education. Reference south of the border, whatever political stripe you are, half the issues that are happening there right now have to do with what happened to the automobile sector as jobs went overseas and as things got, as robots moved into the car manufacturing business. So it's pretty clear that a problem was created and there wasn't a policy oriented towards solving it. Whether you're Democrat or Republican, it's an issue.
Sure.
And to build upon that in the aviation side, we are working directly with the pilots when we're talking about an autonomous aircraft, it's the companies like Helijet, it's the academic institutions like BCIT and the BC Aviation Council in working on upskilling our conventional workforce in preparation for this innovation that can come down the line, so that there's not that stopgap in the jobs that will be, yes, lost, but hopefully that catalytic effect from the economics of new industries, new routes, new applications, that transition can be as efficient as possible.
I like this question. This question is from Dan Harmon. What simple practical measures are being taken now or could be taken now to help accelerate the move to AVs in places like Whistler? Simple practical changes. And I guess the same for VTOLs.
Well, I did this survey of city officials and planners around North America, also Australia. And one of the things they're doing right now, and it's even relevant because Uber and Lyft are in place, or at least in some places are in place, but that's pick up and drop off zones. So when you start doing your long range planning, you know that they have to be accounted for in the future, and be ready for that or plan for it as we go. Other examples would be start thinking about when you're approving new development, how much space do we have to account for automobiles? Calgary in the East Village 2 years ago built a condominium tower with 0 parking, sold out in a day. Now it's right next to an LRT station, but that's the sort of thing we can start thinking about to anticipate this. But to the question, we don't know how rapidly, and it's going to be piece by piece. So, but I think we need to be aware of that change coming and do the best we can to adapt and be ready as it comes.
Yeah, I mean, just conducting a feasibility analysis of how this would take place in Whistler is we do this for huge transportation projects, and there's a massive cost attached to it. They're right now, I think, conducting a feasibility analysis of putting a train from Vancouver to Seattle, and the capital involved to do that is going to be billions and billions of dollars. In my opinion, a parallel exercise should be, should autonomous vehicles in a more sort of democratized fashion be looked at as potentially a cheaper option. And I think as Whistler grows and changes, I mean, just even kicking that off with, does this work here? What are the reasons why it would, and what are the reasons why it wouldn't? Just as an initial step would probably be a good thing.
And then from our side on the aviation piece, it's creating that framework and expanding upon the movement that we're trying to incorporate in listening and diving into the public engagement so that those use cases are tapping into that triple bottom line of the environmental, economic, and social side.
So I have someone behind me who's going to hook us off stage, but I'd like to give you each a minute to summarize. Where are we at? What do you want this audience to hear? So let's start with JR.
So I'm going to leave off on that invitation to expand your minds on the applicability for a new transportation narrative of the future. We are working in expanding these different aspects. What we ask is lean into those sticky questions, present them with a voice so that we have an additional opportunity to dive into that work.
Thanks, JR. Peter?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the same sort of sentiment. I think that this is something that Whistler should be looking at. I mean, it's something that we should start at least investigating and decide if it, how quickly. I mean, I think the general argument is this is happening, globally. It's just going to happen faster and slower in different places. And so I think it's important for Whistler to look at this and say, what timing works for us.
Thanks. David?
Yeah, I've been looking at this for, as I said, about 3 years. And when I started thinking about Whistler, I kind of thought, oh, wait a minute, this is not a Whistler thing. This is Vancouver, this is Toronto, this is whatever. But, imagine that you arrive here and you don't need your car anymore. That you can do everything you want to do. You don't have to worry about finding. I mean, I have a carry rack on the top of my car so that I can always find some place to park, and I never put anything in that rack. So so I can forget about that. I can just use my cell phone, and somebody will come and take me, and then I can have as many beers as I want at Dusty's, and so I think it all sounds pretty good to me.
It's an interesting way to end Dr. Dave Dale Johnson. I want to finish.
Man.
What's that?
The practical man.
Very practical. I'm inspired by this. Your thought, just the projection of where we're moving, and there's so much more to talk about too. I feel we could go on a couple more hours. We haven't talked about the Sea to Sky Highway and all of the applications to it. So we'll have to come back in 2 weeks and have the same conversation all over again. I want to thank the Squamish Nation, Lil'wat Nation for the opportunity to do this here. The Whistler Literary Society for making it happen, and the Whistler Learning Center for their work. And I will hand it on to our kind host, Dave Williamson, to give the final goodbyes.
Am I on here? Yeah. Thank you, everybody. It was a very interesting evening. I think everyone will agree that it's a brave new future that we've got in front of us. I want to thank the panel for taking some time out of their weekend to share their knowledge. We have some gifts for the panelists, and I'll make a point of some very, very nice little bags from one of our local companies.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Note the logo there. Very nice logo.
Thank you very much.
All right.
There's some wine.
Perfect.
Thanks so much.
And-
I appreciate it.
All right. And a special sort of a non-gift for our mayor.
Jam.
Yeah, that's right. So thank you again to our corporate sponsor, TELUS, and our supporters, as Jack mentioned, the Whistler Literary Society, PSAV, Whistler Blackcomb, Tourism Whistler, and the Resort Municipality of Whistler for supporting this event. Thanks to the small audience. Nice to have you here. These are the people that managed to purchase the tickets early before we actually cut off the sales. It's nice to have some more bodies in the room. If you, the audience at home, enjoyed the evening, I'd urge you to make a donation online. These will allow the Whistler Learning Center to continue to bring more events like this. Now, our next event will take place early in 2021, and it's going to be an investigation of the concept that's recently surfaced about regenerative tourism. If you'd like to be notified about the event, please visit our website and subscribe to our newsfeed. Thank you very much.